I do want to spend a few minutes and just walk you through what the bill attempts to do and what our plan is here. So I'd open with a quote that I thought was particularly meaningful for today, which is, there is a Jefferson quote that says, "I am not an advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths discovered, and manners of opinions change, with the changes of circumstances, institutions must advance also to keep pace. We might as well require a man to wear the coat that still fitted him as a child, as to expect civilized society to remain under the regimen of our ancestors." And so I would open by saying that the school finance formula that we have now has served us well for a long time. The facts are, when this School Finance Act was passed, no one in this room had an email address, had a cell phone, or had access to the internet. Those are just some of the most obvious things that have changed in the landscape, but the biggest debate in education at that time was President Clinton's proposal on school uniforms. And so I would say more than a bit has changed in those intervening 18 years. Senate Bil was just starting pre-K at that point, and so there was a lot to get done. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're trying to do to help update that formula. So there are three big categories of change we're proposing in this bill. The first is we're proposing modernizing the way that we fund education. And in that formula, we want to finally change the student count system so that every child in Colorado counts every day. So that we don't have an outdated system where a student is only worth a state investment on one day of the year and worth nothing on the other 183 days of the year. We want to allow students the flexibility to make sure they can learn the way that they learn best. And that means more flexibility for students to access content in more varied ways, and the varied ways that schools are helping them access it now. Whether that means internships, whether that means concurrent enrollment, whether that means online courses. We want to create the flexibility for students to be able to access content the way that best serves them. And then we want to make possible the extended school years or extended school days for districts or schools that believe that their students need that additional time to meet the new higher bar the state has set for all kids, and it plans on all kids being able to meet. The second category is we want to definitively make investments that we know make a difference. And that includes making a significant investment in school readiness and early childhood education. It means finally committing in the state that every student in the state has access to full-day kindergarten, and that every student who needs it has access to early childhood education for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. The data on this is overwhelming. We know that that difference is the difference between 5 months gained in a year's time for a student without access to that, and between 16 months gained in a year's time for students that do have access to those services, which means if we're talking about how to help make sure every child knows how to read by 3rd grade, the best investment we can make is make sure they have access to high-quality education when they're in kindergarten and early childhood. We also know that we need to make a significant investment in teachers and leaders in this state. We've proposed a great teachers and leaders, or a teacher and leader investment, which will help support districts with the resources they need to attract, retain, and develop the great educators that are in our system, including helping them learn how to navigate a complex new system we've built in this state that I think we've all supported, to help make sure we have new standards, new assessments, new accountability, new evaluations, new expectations for early childhood literacy, and to do those in a way that makes sure we deliver the best possible outcomes. And then we want to make a fundamental commitment to ensure that all students have the resources they need regardless of their needs. What we know right now is that there are students with specific needs in this state that we are failing to meet. Those include the students in this state who are in poverty. We have now the second fastest growing rate of children in poverty of any state in the country. We've seen dramatic increases. From the last time this formula was in place, that number has more than doubled in the state of Colorado, the percentage of kids living in poverty. We know that they need resources to make sure they're successful. We also know that we have a special ed population that we have significantly underfunded, and the districts don't have money they can pull out of thin air to pay for those resources. All they can do is pull dollars from other parts of the formula to fund the state and federal requirements for special ed services. So we need to begin to make a reinvestment into those components. We know that we have underfunded the needs of our sometimes twice exceptional and also our gifted and talented students who need the additional challenge of modified instruction. We want to make a new additional investment into those funds. And we know that we have one of our other fastest growing populations, the percentage of students in this state who are English language learners. Right now we have about 105,000 of those students identified. Our current formula only funds about 5,000 of them. And so we're proposing the creation of a way to help support English language learners and making sure they have a chance to successfully integrate into and succeed in the education system. Finally, we want to try and adjust the formula to make sure that funding is transparent, that it's accountable, and that it's fair. And that means a number of changes to our current system. One is that we will be the first state in the country to allow our taxpayers and our parents and our students and our teachers to be able to track every tax dollar every day and know exactly where those dollars go in the K-12 system and what they're spent on. So you can see, not just at the district level, but at the school level, where your tax investment and where your kids' dollars are going and what they're supporting. An unprecedented level of transparency for a system that we think is doing good work and is capable of doing great work, and we give them the revenues that they need to do it. We will put in place a process that will make sure we are measuring what our return on our investment is for these investments, and also we know what our continuing gaps are on those investments. So we put in place a call here for a preliminary cost study to determine what we think the needs are to meet our K-12 outcomes we want to reach. And an ongoing, every 4 years, we look at what impact did those investments have on outcomes. Because the ultimate question here is, how do dollars invested lead to outcomes for students? And so both what return have we gotten on those investments, and also what continuing gaps are there in the program in the system that are still underfunded or unfunded. And how do we begin to bring those two sides together so you both have the outcomes we want with the resources we need to drive those outcomes. And we will work on trying to build a system that more equitably distributes resources than the current formula. We have a current formula that no one has chosen, but that has happened to us based on an overlapping set of provisions, both statutory and constitutional, that have forced districts to make significant changes to their mill levies or to their assessed valuation rates, which meant that we've seen wide fluctuation in the mills and the revenues for local districts. What we'd like to do is put the state back on a path to more long-term fiscal sustainability, where we have a more sustainable match between the local share and the state share. 30 years ago, about 70% of the total funding for K-12 came from local districts, and about 30% came from this building. As of next year, that number will be almost perfectly reversed, where almost 70% of all funding for K-12 will come out of this building, and only 30% will come from the districts. When we talk about the rest of the budgets, we have to balance to make sure that other important interests like higher ed, like healthcare, like corrections are all met. What we're facing is part of the challenge that as the K-12 budget increasingly expands because our state share expands, that makes it harder for us to do other things we need to do well. And so the ability to finally make sure that we are reestablishing some balance between local and state share both makes education funding more stable and more durable, because local share is not subject to the same fluctuations as the dollars in this building are come budget time, and that we will have more long-term relief on our budget structure and yet meet our commitment to make sure K-12 has our funding it needs.